We called it the Old Dump, a sinister name that hinted at the darkness hidden within. It was an ancient landfill on the outskirts of our somber village, where people arrived in their battered cars, unloading whole trunks full of junk. Everything they no longer wanted or couldn't sell found its way there. Perhaps it was illegal, even back then, but in those grim 80s, no one cared much about environmental issues. Unwanted furniture, mountains of rusted scrap metal, broken toys, and miscellaneous household waste piled up, creating a landscape of decay. Yet children were strictly forbidden to play there, just as we were warned against going near the river that wound through the valley floor. Several years earlier, a local boy named Hugh had drowned there, leaving a dark stain on all our hearts. Whispers spread about the dump carrying the same dangers as the river, although no one could quite explain why. For us, it was a treasure trove, a place where anyone could stumble upon a true find. But for our parents, it was a den of peril, teeming with disease-carrying rats and brimming with hidden threats. Despite the stern warnings from the adults, the neighborhood children couldn't resist sneaking onto the old dump. The forbidden allure only heightened the appeal of the shadowy adventures we had there. It was in that ominous summer that Terry Dimble vanished from the nearby village. One day, he set out on his bike and never returned home. Some believed he was abducted or murdered, while others suspected he'd escaped the wrath of his abusive, perpetually drunk father. Terry was often seen with bruises and cuts. After his disappearance, our parents grew even more fearful of letting us play outside. They saw only dangers and traps lurking in the shadows, while we children saw only possibilities in that dark world. I knew Terry Dimble, we attended the same school, and fate seemed to play a dark trick on him by giving him dimples in his cheeks. These deep indentations appeared whenever he smiled, as though foreshadowing an ominous fate. After his disappearance, I was consumed by a sense of dread. I never imagined that my teasing of his surname could have had any connection to his vanishing, but it made me question if I could have been kinder to him, made his life more bearable, especially given his troubled family circumstances. But as a child, such thoughts only come too late. One day, my friend Adam came to me with a proposition to explore the old dump. We had been there before, and despite the lurking dangers, we always found something intriguing. Once, our classmate Dean Spellman discovered a samurai sword there, still stained with blood. We decided we could play at the dump as much as we wanted, as long as we kept it to ourselves and didn't let our parents know where we spent our time. Those were the unspoken rules of our safety. It was the height of summer. Childhood memories are always tinged with the warmth of summer, aren't they? We stopped by the corner store and bought ice cream for the road. Adam, a big fan of sweets, convinced the shopkeeper to add two chocolate bars to his cone. He always had a way with words. The place we were headed was a 20-minute walk along a dirt road we called the road to the old dump. This was where people would bring all sorts of junk in their cars. The closer we got to the dump, the more debris we saw scattered along the road. Faded sheets of paper, plastic bags, and candy wrappers danced in the wind like restless spirits. It was hard to tell whether the wind carried the trash from the dump itself or if some people were too lazy to finish the journey and threw out their load prematurely. As we ventured further, the trash piled up, eventually covering the dirt road entirely. At that point, we knew we had reached the old dump. That day, Adam and I waded through heaps of refuse in search of something intriguing. The sun scorched us with its unforgiving heat, and predatory birds circled overhead, their shadows flitting across the ground like ominous signs. Suddenly, Adam spotted a soiled, disposable diaper, oozing vile yellow liquid. He prodded it with a stick and chased after me, his laughter echoing with a touch of madness. As he got closer, he flung the diaper at me, narrowly missing by a few inches. It was utterly revolting. Trying to avoid the disgusting mess, I stumbled over a tipped wheelbarrow and almost cut my hand on broken glass. If I had, it would have meant a trip to the hospital for a tetanus shot and probably stitches. That would have ruined my week. But I got my revenge on Adam. I found an old wool hat and pulled it down over his head, obscuring his vision. At first, it seemed a feeble retaliation compared to his disgusting prank with the diaper, but I told him I'd seen lice or fleas on the hat, suggesting they might have crawled onto his head and were now feeding on his blood. Of course, I hadn't seen anything of the sort. My strategy seemed to work because he kept scratching his head afterward. Maybe something did infest his hair. Who knows? A few minutes later, on the far side of the dump, we stumbled upon a freezer lying atop a pile of construction debris. We stopped to take in the discovery. We'd been warned to keep our distance from such things because they could only be opened from the outside if someone got trapped inside. There was no way out. They even ran public service announcements on BBC Two and other government channels about the danger of freezers, emphasizing the gravity of the threat. Though I couldn't quite understand who in their right mind would crawl into a discarded refrigerator. It looked like a giant white coffin. What do we do with it? Adam asked. What can we even do with it? I shrugged, at a loss. The freezer was too bulky and heavy to be simply moved. Even the two of us together would have struggled to shift it. No clue, Adam said, giving the side of the freezer a kick with his white Reebok. The thud echoed dully. Then, as we stood there, something impossible happened. A faint, muffled knocking came from inside. Like an eerie answer to Adam's kick, we exchanged startled glances, trying to confirm that we both heard it. When we realized we had, our mouths dropped open in shock. The sound was unmistakably coming from inside the freezer. What the hell was that? Adam asked, going pale. How should I know? I replied. Forgot my X-ray goggles. Do you actually have X-ray goggles? Yeah, got them for free with a box of shredded wheat. But they don't work. Too bad. Yep. So, should we open it? What do you think? I shifted uncomfortably, a sense of foreboding creeping over me. I think we should. Why? Why not? Adam's logic seemed ironclad. I'd look like a coward if I argued, so instead, I said, first, give it another knock. Let's make sure it wasn't just a fluke. Adam shrugged and gave the freezer another couple of firm knocks. To our horror, the knocks were met with an immediate muffled response. There was no doubt now. The sound came from inside the freezer. Whatever was in there was alive and intelligent. That was the most terrifying part. Now we have to open it, Adam said. And I knew he was right. We both leaned over the freezer to examine it more closely. Up close, it loomed larger, like an iceberg threatening to crash down on us. I reached out and gently touched its smooth white surface. It was worn and dimpled with dents. Adam cast a final piercing glance at me, then gripped the handle with both hands and gave it a firm yank. The freezer creaked open with a sharp, chilling sound, revealing the body of Terry Dimple, the missing boy. Adam let out a shriek and recoiled from the handle as if it had scalded him. The door swung wide open and slammed against a pile of broken bricks with a heavy thud. My friend fell backward, scrambling away from the open freezer in a panic. It felt as though someone had struck me in the gut. I remember emitting a long, muffled gasper sound that pierced the oppressive silence that had suddenly descended upon the old dump. Any other day, that sound might have been humorous, maybe even dramatic, but not today. Today, it was pitiful and subdued. Terry's face was twisted into a silent scream, his mouth wide open, revealing a blackened, swollen tongue protruding from his lips. His ashen cheeks were sunken, his eyes closed. As I stared at him, reeling from the shock, something dark and many-legged scurried across his waxy forehead. Another detail burned into my mind: the blood smeared on the inside of the door, on his fingers and knuckles. It had faded from crimson to a dirty brown. I knew how it got there. The boy had tried desperately to escape, breaking his nails and tearing his flesh in the process, pounding on the door in a frantic bid to be heard. The worst part was the stench that escaped when we opened the door. It reeked of decay, of putrid meat and excrement, with a sickly sweet undertone. It was as if someone had mixed cheap perfume with a rotting sheep carcass. The sudden, acrid rush of gases was so strong it nearly knocked me off my feet. Adam, who had backed away from the freezer, quickly jumped up and joined me. "Is he really dead?" Adam asked, his voice shaky and weak. "It looks that way," I said, struggling to hold back the waves of nausea that threatened to overwhelm me. "Then who was knocking?" I couldn't process the question. The horror of what we'd seen had overwhelmed me, and I'd forgotten the faint knocks that had drawn us there in the first place. The question hung in the air like something tangible. Looking back, I think Adam knew I didn't have an answer for him, but he still held on to a flicker of hope that I could offer some logical explanation. But as if the day hadn't already taken a dark enough turn, while we stared at Terry's decaying corpse, his eyelids quivered and suddenly opened, revealing ghostly milk-white irises. I gasped, then immediately regretted it as my mouth and lungs filled with the stench of death and decay. Adam experienced the same nauseating onslaught. He vomited on himself, his shirt drenched with vanilla ice cream, and thick white strands hanging from his mouth. He didn't even seem to notice, just standing there in his own mess. The next thing I remember, we were running. It was like a delayed reaction. One moment we stood frozen, and the next, we were racing away. I don't know how Adam felt, but all I wanted was to put as much distance as possible between myself and the dead boy. As I fled, something inside me cracked like brittle plastic. I felt it, almost heard it. All I could think was, Terry Dimple is dead. I saw him, I smelled him, but then he opened his eyes. Dead boys don't do that. They can't. I couldn't comprehend it, couldn't wrap my head around it. It was too much for my young mind to process. As Adam and I stumbled through the heaps of junk, I chanced to glance back and saw Terry, sitting in his ice-cold coffin, watching us with those horrifying, milky white eyes. He was smiling. I saw the dimples in his cheeks. That day, Adam and I raced home without stopping, in silence, not exchanging a single word. Once we finally got there, we shared our horrifying nightmare with our parents. They were furious with me for disobeying their orders, but then, shaken to the core, they called the police. Later that evening, the police returned with news. They told us they couldn't find Terry Dimple, dead but seated, though they, of course, called him Terry Dimple, nor the discarded freezer. They meticulously searched the old dump but found neither. Then they left, muttering about wasted police time. Though our parents preferred not to believe our story, they acknowledged we weren't making it up. Adam and I were both clearly terrified, and his vomit-stained shirt was proof something had happened. They thought we might have been pranked or had fallen into a shared hallucination. Adam and I never spoke about the incident again. In fact, it seemed we stopped spending time together, at least not alone. When we encountered each other in school hallways or later in some nearly empty pub, there was always a lingering tension between us that I never could quite understand. I feared him because it reminded me of that nightmarish day, and I believe he felt the same way about me. After finishing school, Adam sank into the dark whirlpool of a dangerous crowd. Those closest to him knew that it wasn't his crowd. He didn't know moderation, just as in that day when he insisted on having 2 chocolate bars in his ice cream cone. In a matter of months, Adam transitioned from smoking cigarettes to marijuana, from crack to heroin. It seemed as though he couldn't go without drugs, couldn't face being sober and alone with his thoughts. Perhaps it was those thoughts that eventually led to his end, because last December his body was found right where the old dump used to be. The area is cleared now, and the dirt road has been paved. But for those who remember, it's still the road to the old dump. Adam still visits me in my dreams. I never see him as a drug-addled adult he became. In my dreams, he's always a chubby boy holding an ice cream cone with 2 chocolate bars tucked inside. But he's not alone. He's with Terry Dimple, and together they chase me down the road to the old dump. For now, I managed to escape them, but I know one day they'll catch up to me. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. I hope it left you shaken. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Many more disturbing tales await you, ones that will stir your very soul.